So our vision statement as a congregation is moving toward Jesus together. And I think there is no better prospect than that. I delight in the idea of us growing closer and closer to Jesus, being like him, living like him. It's incredibly good for all of us and all that we meet, everyone that we meet, to follow Jesus, to hear his voice amid all the other voices. Thanks, Regina, for that. There's no one that I would rather follow. There's no voice more full of truth and love. There's no one that I delight in more than Jesus. Someone once said, Jesus in the Gospels is full of surprises, and they are the surprises of perfection. Said he is tender without being weak. He is strong without being coarse. He is lowly without being servile. He has conviction without intolerance. He has holiness without Pharisaicism. He has passion without prejudice. No one has ever mastered life like this one. That's the kind of person that I want to follow. Jesus never made a misstep. Every other person is judged harshly by history. We think we now know better than them. We no longer do some of the things that they did. They were a child of an unenlightened time. Except for Jesus. When you look at the people of his day and then look at Jesus, he never joined them in any of their missteps. He rose above his culture, above his time. Nothing swayed him from true truth, from genuine love. That's a person worthy of us following. The rest of this morning, I want us to just celebrate some for instances. Here's the first one. The people of his day viewed women as more property than as persons. A woman belonged first to her father and then to her husband. She had few legal rights. Her testimony was not recognized in court because she was a woman. She was not educated. She was to learn household skills and was not thought capable of much more. Men seldom had conversations with women. The attitude was women don't know much, can't do much. Why talk to them? But look at how Jesus treated women. At the end of Luke chapter 10, Jesus is at the home of Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. And Martha is bustling around being a good hostess while Mary is sitting with her brother and the disciples, hanging on to every word that Jesus says. I'm sure after many glares, many looks, Martha finally, exasperated, says to Jesus, verse 40, Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. In contrast to his culture, Jesus responds, this is the New Living Translation, "My dear Martha, there is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken from her. Mary has chosen what is better." The next chapter, Luke 11, as Jesus was teaching a crowd, and the crowd was growing more and more amazed at his teaching, a woman called out, "Blessed is the mother who gave you birth and who nursed you." Basically, having a son like you is the greatest aspiration that a woman can have. How does Jesus respond? "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it." Motherhood is not the most important goal for a woman. Jesus had many conversations on profound truths with women. The first person he told that he was the Messiah was a woman in John chapter 4. The first person he told that he was the resurrection and the life was a woman, John chapter 11. There were other people too that Jesus valued more than his culture did. For instance, children. One day, this is recorded in Mark chapter 10, the same chapter as our text. Evidently, a child had had a few moments with Jesus, and the child had such a good time, and Jesus so obviously enjoyed it too, that soon many children were being brought to Jesus to receive a blessing, a touch, a word, whatever. The men around Jesus, his disciples, started noticing all these children and started getting bothered. And they began saying, "You children must stay away. Jesus is too busy. He's talking to all these important people." That was the attitude of Jesus' day. Was it Jesus' attitude? He was very displeased with his disciples. He was upset with them. Actually, verse 14, the NIV says he was indignant. The New Living Translation says he was angry. He said, "Children are important. Children have value. It's not necessary that a Martha, she here, has to grow up before she's my friend. It's not necessary that Andrew grows up before I love him." Jesus said, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them." Then the end of Mark chapter 10, which we read, we see more instances where Jesus shows this mastery of life that rises above his day and age and makes me want to follow him. What did his culture and time say about those who are weak, those who are without power, or persons with disability? We today, we believe in the equal dignity and every person and value of every person. And we almost give special rights to people who are struggling with disadvantages. We see the necessity of caring and advocating for them. Did the people in the Greco-Roman world, did they believe those things? Well, maybe some of the more uncouth people didn't, but surely their perceptive and respected teachers like Plato and Aristotle and Seneca, surely they did. Not at all. they would have found the idea that a person with a disability has worth, especially that we would like privilege them and their rights relatively high, give it attention. They would have found that laughable, even incomprehensible. In the Greco-Roman world, if you were a winner, if you had superiority of strength and honor, you should have perks. You are the one who should have rights. And if you are inferior, well, we don't want to sink much resource into you. We don't want to give you attention and consideration. They had no sense in that day that the poor or the weak might have value just because they were human. We shouldn't help the weak, the inferior. Pity actually in that day and age was seen as an unhealthy emotion, as something you should rid yourself of, because it led you to waste time and energy on the weak, on the inferior. The future is surely not with them. You want to invest in the strong. You want to invest in the winners. Give to those worth giving to. And we today have an instinctive revulsion to that attitude. But all the ancient world was serenely sure that some lives are worth more than others. If we would have asked Plato if he agrees with that claim that some lives are worth more than others, he would have said, of course, it's obvious. Some lives are worth more. Some are rich, and some are poor. Some are wise, some are foolish. Some are strong, some are weak. We today say, no way, all lives are of worth. And that is how Jesus responded. Again and again, we see Jesus caring for the poor, caring for the lame, those with paralyzed legs or hands, arms, or the blind. The end of Mark chapter 10 is the precious story of Jesus interacting with a blind man. He was sitting by the roadside near Jericho begging. And Jesus happened to be going that way. And Jesus and his entourage, he had a lot who followed him. And the blind man heard that something was happening. And he learned that it was Jesus and his followers going by. So he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The people around rebuked him, told him, just be quiet. Verse 48, he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus heard that voice. And Jesus stopped and he told the people, "Call him." When the message got to him, he jumped to his feet and somehow was able to make his way to Jesus, and Jesus healed him. And it ends, and he followed Jesus along the road. With women, with children, with the blind man, there's a theme. Jesus chose to value those who in his world had less status, definitely had less power than him. And in so doing, Jesus dramatically rose above his world. And he especially shines in the story right before the story of the blind man, where he teaches that those with power and privilege are to serve others. You don't use those under you or ignore them or tell them to be quiet. You serve them. You help them. You add value to their lives. We see this in the rest of Mark chapter 10 that we read. Jesus' disciples were increasingly certain that Jesus was soon going to enter into being a player in the world's power structure. They were sure that he, as Messiah, was going to deliver them from the Romans. So, of course, he was going to be a major power player. And they, as the inner circle of Jesus, they would also have power. And so they started arguing among themselves as to what their ranking was going to be on the totem pole. Who was greater than who among them? Verse 35, James and John didn't just argue with the others about it. They went to the soon-to-be king. Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory. Jesus, how about if you name me as your prime minister and this brother here, the Speaker of the House, whatever. And Jesus says, you don't know what you are asking. And they indeed didn't. Verse 41, when the other disciples heard about this, they were indignant with James and John. Not indignant that James and John would ask such a question, but that they asked it before they were able to. Jesus calls them all together. He says, among the Gentiles, those with power lord it over the others. Verse 43, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. He goes on, he says, that's how I, your Lord and Master, have set an example for you. I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. Jesus sees power not as an opportunity to dominate others, to take advantage of them, but to love them, to add value to their lives, to treat them as essentially better than him. Sacrifice himself for them. Leading by serving is now accepted wisdom in our culture. Leaders who serve are ones who make things work in a way that ruling does not. Robert Greenleaf wrote that the manager of any business should be able to say, I'm in the business of growing people. People who are stronger, healthier, freer, more self-reliant, more competent. Incidentally, we also make and sell at a profit things that people want to buy so that we can pay for all this. That's the way that a company grows. That's the way that any group thrives, through its leaders adding value to the lives of those they lead. Any neighborhood, any nation. And Jesus knew this. And he knew tons more of insights like this. Who wouldn't want to follow such a man? Dallas Willard, he was an ace philosopher. He was the head of the philosophy department of UCLA, I believe, some university in California. And he was a beloved spiritual mentor, wrote many books on spiritual disciplines. He says, if you can find someone smarter than Jesus, follow him. If you believe that Jesus would want you to follow someone who is not the wisest, well then you don't have a very high opinion of Jesus. But you won't find anyone wiser than Jesus. Next Sunday, we're going to have fun seeing where I talked about us having those ideas of ways of thinking and living that are better than what, the people in the ancient world had. Next Sunday, we're going to talk about where those ideas that we have about everybody having rights, everybody having worth, and so on. We're going to talk about where those ideas themselves come from. And I'll give you a hint, you probably guess. Christian and non-Christian historians are increasingly clear that they come from this one that many of us delight to follow.